Hi everyone, and welcome back to Bowdie Shorts, making law make sense in 15 minutes or less. In our last episode, we looked at damages and asked how much money should the claimant receive. But today we're looking at a different question. What if money isn't the answer? What if the innocent party doesn't want compensation? What if they want the contract performed, or they want their money back, or they want somebody else to pay if the contracting party doesn't? Well, that's what today's topic is all about. We're looking at the remedies available when damages either aren't appropriate or simply aren't enough. Now, when students think about remedies, they usually think breach equals damages. And most of the time, that is correct. Damages are the main remedy for breach of contract. But importantly, they aren't the only remedy. Sometimes the law provides remedies that force performance, stop breaches, recover payments, compensate for benefits received, or allow claims against third parties. And today's video brings those remedies together. So let's begin with remedies that actually make the defendant do what they promised. Because sometimes money isn't what the claimant wants. Sometimes they want performance. Now, the simplest remedy is action for an agreed sum, sometimes called an action for the price. And this is a straightforward debt claim. Money, payment should have been made, it wasn't, the claimant sues for the amount that's been owed. Now, why is this different from damages? Well, simply, we are not measuring loss. We're simply enforcing an obligation to pay. So questions about remoteness and mitigation disappear. The only issue is, does the defendant owe the money? The answer is yes, the claimant can recover it. Simple. Next thing we're going to look at is one of the most famous equitable remedies, known as specific performance. And this is where the court orders the defendant to perform their contractual obligation. In effect, the court says, do what you promise to do. Now, when is this available? Well, not whenever the claimant wants it. Specific performance is usually only available where damages would be inadequate. The classic example is land. So why land, you might ask? Well, because every piece of land is unique. If somebody contracts to sell you a particular house and later refuses to complete the sale, damages may not truly compensate you. You didn't want a similar house, you wanted that house. So specific performance therefore becomes much more attractive. So when would this not be available? Well, services provide the classic example. The courts do not generally force people to work together. So employment contracts are a good illustration. If trust has broken down, compelling ongoing cooperation between the parties becomes impractical. And the courts are reluctant to force relationships to continue. Now, specific performance, it's important to note, is an equitable remedy. And this means it is discretionary. The claimant is not automatically entitled to it. The court must decide whether granting the remedy would be fair. Now let's look at another equitable remedy, injunctions. Now, students often find this easier if they compare it with specific performance. So specific performance usually requires somebody to do something. An injunction usually requires somebody not to do something. So if we look at a simple example, suppose somebody sells their business and agrees not to open a competing business nearby. They later try to do exactly that. The buyer may seek an injunction. The injunction therefore prevents the breach from happening. Well, why is this useful? Well, because damages may not truly fix the problem. Once a customer has been lost, reputation damaged, or confidential information disclosed, compensation may not provide a complete solution. Sometimes prevention is preferable to compensation. Now we move to a different type of remedy altogether, restitution. And restitution isn't really about enforcing the contract, nor is it primarily about compensation. Instead, it's concerned with a different idea, the idea of unjust enrichment. So the key question to ask is, has somebody received a benefit that they should not be allowed to keep? If the answer is yes, restitution may become relevant. So the most straightforward situation arises where money has been paid and nothing has been received in return. And this is known as a total failure of consideration. So imagine paying for goods that never arrive, or paying a contractor who never starts the work. The payer has received absolutely nothing. Restitution may allow the money to be recovered. The important limitation, though, is the word total, and that is crucial. If some part of the promised performance has already been received, restitution is usually unavailable and the claimant will have to rely on damages instead. Now, another restitutionary remedy is quantum meruit, which simply means a reasonable sum. And this usually arises where work has been done, but something prevents completion of the contract. So ask, what is a reasonable amount for the work actually performed? And that's often easier than calculating expectation loss. Now, what if there was never a contract? Well, this is where quantum meruit becomes particularly useful. Sometimes parties start work while negotiations are still ongoing. Then the negotiations collapse. No contract is ever formed, but work has already been done. In those circumstances, restitution may provide payment for the value of the work supplied. Now let's enter slightly more advanced territory by looking at the concept of restitutionary damages. So traditionally, damages compensate the claimant's loss, but exceptionally, the courts have sometimes focused not on that loss, but the defendant's gain. Why? Well, because occasionally the claimant's true loss is difficult to identify, or because the defendant has deliberately benefited from the breach. In limited circumstances, the court may award what are sometimes called negotiated damages. And the focus is not traditional compensation. Instead, the court asks, what would the parties reasonably have negotiated as a release fee? And for SQE purposes, we simply need to recognize that these awards are exceptional. Let's move to claims involving third parties, starting with guarantees. Now, a guarantee is essentially a promise that if somebody else doesn't pay, I will. The guarantor only becomes liable when the primary debtor defaults, and that makes a guarantee a secondary obligation. Now, the golden rule for SQE purposes is that guarantees must be evidenced in writing. If that requirement is not satisfied, the guarantee will be ineffective. Now, we need to compare that with indemnities, as students constantly confuse guarantees and indemnities. So here's a shortcut. A guarantee says, if they don't pay, I will. An indemnity says, I'll ensure you're paid. So what's the difference here? Well, an indemnity creates a primary obligation. Liability arises directly. It does not depend on somebody else defaulting first. And because it is a primary obligation, it does not need to be evidenced in writing. The distinction appears regularly in SQE questions. So whenever you see a third party promising payment, ask, is the obligation secondary or primary? If secondary, it's a guarantee. If primary, it's an indemnity. And that one question often solves the problem. So what's Bowdie's bottom line? Well, every remedies question in this particular video begins with one issue. If damages aren't the answer, what else can the court do? And then work through the options. Does the claimant want money already owed? If so, then that's action for an agreed sum. Does the claimant want actual performance? If so, it's specific performance. Does the claimant want a breach prevented? If so, we're looking at an injunction. Has somebody been unjustly enriched? If so, can we look at recovery of money paid, the concept of quantum meruit, the restitutionary remedies? Is there a third party promising payment? If so, if it's a secondary obligation, then it's a guarantee. If it's a primary obligation, then it's indemnity. And remember, damages, though, despite all of this video, will remain the primary contractual remedy. So everything in this video is really about the situations where compensation alone is not enough. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Bowdie Shorts. Please look out for further videos available on the YouTube page right now.